Government workers not just protesting calls for government cuts, even though they make a lot more than folks in the private sector. Now the president of the largest federal employee union reportedly saying this, quote, "If I meet one more politician who tells me we need to tighten our belts, I'm going to take my belt off and I'm going to whoop his blank." Steve, first of all, let's just point out the differential between what federal workers make and private sector workers make. This is huge. Look at this, 115,000 versus 66.
Yeah, we already see the corrupt influence of 50 Shades of Grey that he's talking about whipping people. But the fact of the matter is, the government is way over bloated today. You see it playing out even in the Defense Department, David, as they're cutting back uniformed personnel. They're increasing one for one the bureaucratic personnel, as if a bureaucratic army can keep us safe. You could cut the federal government employees by 20 to 25%, and the rest of the American people would not notice the difference. Very, very inefficient organization.
Yeah, and Rick, this is not just Republicans saying this. A lot of Democrats are in the battle against public sector unions, too. We got Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel against the teachers union, New York Governor Andy Cuomo, and in Missouri, they have a right-to-work measure that was introduced by a Democrat.
Right. Look, I mean, first of all, points to Steve Forbes for finding a way to work 50 Shades of Grey into this. That was hugely impressive. But look, yeah, you know, I think we're all coming to the point in time where Democrats, Republicans, we have problems with public unions. The problem is, if you are somebody who is a unionist, as I do tend to be, you realize that the private unions have all but vanished. I want the private unions back, and I'll do without the public unions because then we can start solving income inequality.
Yeah, but EMAC, the problem is that management for public sector unions is us, the taxpayers.
That's right.
We are the management. They're supposed to serve us. They're called public servants for a reason, and yet it's all about the cash. 86% of all the state politicians in Illinois are paid by unions, so they're just given payback.
Yeah, that's right. And it happens in the federal level. You have the National Treasury Employees Union rooting for President Obama, and those are the people who work at the IRS and the Treasury. Look, the problem is you can't vote out the bureaucrats. We've got, this is a true entitlement state. These are the guys, there's a lot of these workers watching porn at work, or they're doing full-time union work. And we're also seeing, watch this, the GAO has recommended 9,000 different ways that these guys can cut waste, fraud, and abuse. They've ignored it through the decades, and now the GAO has raised the number of federal programs at risk of fraud and abuse to 32, including tax enforcement. That is really amazing.
And Mike, the reason we're not making any progress in cutting our debt, our national debt, from, what is it now, $18.1 trillion is because of this, because politicians in the past have made unrealistic promises to public sector unions.
The public sector government unions, David, have become sort of this form of welfare. I mean, you know, they only have to contribute, for instance, 6% of their paycheck towards their Social Security, where if you're in the private sector and you start a business, you have to contribute 12%. They get a whole bunch of perks that people in the private sector don't get. So it's this de facto welfare system. And you know, they talk about belt tightening, David.
Yeah.
I mean, in the 2016 budget, President Obama is adding to these workers by 30,000.
But John Tamny, he says he's cutting back.
Yeah, their version of cutting back is a bit different from ours. But, you know, the original idea of the federal government was that it was going to do very few things very well. Nowadays, the federal government does very many things very, very badly, and that's the problem. It's not just about spending cuts. It's got to be about abolishing programs and departments altogether, because spending cuts, they just grow back. You've got to get rid of them, because otherwise we're going to see more and more of this.
By the way, Bill, to highlight Rick's point about how many government workers are part of a unit, 35.7% of government workers are part of a public sector union. That is 5 times more than the private sector. That's just huge. It's unacceptable, isn't it?
Well, it's not the unions that bother me. It's the government and the government size that bother me. Now, I have been engaging in some fantasy thinking. We eliminate the Department of Education. We eliminate the Department of Energy. We repeal Dodd-Frank, and we are no longer parasitized by 100,000 regulators and compliance officers. But that's pure fantasy.
Well, Steve, what about that? Just cut back on the institutions that create all this government excess.
That's right, David. That would be a good start. Also, getting rid of the income tax code. Half the lobbying in Washington revolves around it, which always leads to more government programs and higher taxes, more complexity. So, yes, but we talked about 20 years ago, David, getting rid of the Department of Education. And what happens in Washington? It gets bigger.
Yeah, all right. It does seem to do that. The Cash It In gang getting ready to roll at the bottom of the hour. Eric, what have you got coming up?
Hey, David, an Islamic terrorist targeting a kosher deli in Paris is a random act. President Obama thinks so. Is that type of thinking putting America in more danger? Plus, no backlash over bondage. Tinseltown liberals celebrating 50 Shades of Grey while slamming American Sniper. Can you say Hollywood hypocrites? See you at 11:30.
That should be interesting. Eric, thank you very much. Up here, first, innocent until proven guilty. It's a pillar of our justice system. We'll try telling that to innocent Americans watching the IRS seize their bank accounts and close down their businesses. How to stop it next.